You see that wall back there? Back there? I had to rip out the wainscoting like that because we had new baseboards put in right there. I started to fix it, but I haven't finished it yet. One of these days, I'm gonna go all the way. That's what she said. Have you ever heard of the Radioactive Boy Scout? You have? Right? Either way, I'm going to tell you about him today. Right. David Charles Hahn, the Radioactive Boy Scout. He was a Boy Scout, you see, and he lived in Michigan. He was a nuclear radiation enthusiast. Do you know any radiation enthusiasts? Me neither. But David was one. And you know those little golden books? They're for kids and they're little stories. Well, David had read one of those, and it was about chemistry experiments. And after that, that was it. He was a scientist. He would conduct these super secret experiments in his mama's backyard shed. I don't know how much she knew about it, but he was doing it. David's ultimate goal was to build a breeder reactor. And for you small-brained swine who don't know what a breeder reactor is, I'll tell you what it is. It's a nuclear reactor that consumes more fissile material than it can produce. So, I got that wrong. Let me try this again. It's a nuclear reactor that generates more fissile. It's a nuclear reactor that generates more fissile material. Consumes. It's a nuclear reactor that generates more fissile material than it consumes. I nailed that. And no, I can't put that into layman's terms for you because I am not capable of that. But if you're interested, you can Google breed reactor. Not breed reactor. You can Google that. But if you're more interested in this topic, Google breeder reactor and you can read about it and probably be just as confused as I was and am. One day, David was out driving around, being all nuclear and stuff, as one is, and he gets pulled over by the police. And it was I think it was just a routine traffic stop. It was something unrelated to his whole nuclear business hobby thing. And then they realize there's something in the back of this truck, and Officer Gooch, I don't know what his real name is. It's not that. But Officer Gooch turns to Officer Hankerstiltz and he says, "This is troubling." And Officer Hankerstiltz is like, "It sure is, pal." And then David was like, "Oh, hey, fellas. Be careful back there. There's a bunch of radioactive stuff." Officer Gooch and Officer Hankerstiltz ran back to their department and they slammed their hands down on the desk and breathlessly through their mustaches they were like, "We gotta call federal authorities." So they go to where David's living at his mom's place and they get it all checked out and they're like, yep, just as we suspected, this place needs to be cleaned up in 10 months. His lab was emitting 1,000 times the normal background radiation. 10 months later, David's mom's property is cleaned up by the EPA, and David's beloved lab was dismantled. David became real depressed after this whole scandal, and then his girlfriend broke up with him, and then his mom died. She committed suicide. I don't know why. It might have had something to do with this, but at any rate, that's very sad. And so David's really depressed, and he's like, what am I going to do now? If I can't have my lab and be a radiation technologist scientist. And so he enlists in the Navy. And David thrived there. He did very, very well. And then eventually he was honorably discharged for medical issues, which I think were probably related to his mental health, because as it turns out, he was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. In 2007, the FBI got a tip that there was supposedly a second neutron source in his freezer. And so they call him up. And they're like, David, is this David Hahn? And he's like, yes. And they're like, is there a second neutron source in your freezer? And he's like, No, there's not. And they're like, okay. So then they're like, I don't think we can take his word for it. We better investigate this. And so they started questioning people who knew David, and they learned one source from one source. One source was rather full of information. And they said, yeah, I know David. He's a nice guy. He does a lot of cocaine. He doesn't take his schizophrenia meds. And he's really, really paranoid about the people who are able to shock his genitals with their minds. Whew. And he said, I don't think David's out to hurt anybody, but I am pretty concerned about his mental condition. So they're investigating and just all of this, and David ends up getting arrested on larceny of smoke alarms, smoke detectors, same thing, different name. Yeah, he got arrested for that. He was snatching up people's smoke alarms, trying to cipher like radioactive stuff out of it. And so at the courthouse, they ended up giving him 90 days of jail, but they delayed his sentence so that he could go get some psychiatric treatment. And then in September of 2016, David died at 39 years old of an accidental intoxication. He made a cocktail of a whole bunch of drugs, maybe not all at once because it was accidental, and the combined effects of alcohol, Benadryl, and fentanyl killed him. So don't do all of those together, okay? Just don't do that. If you want a slightly more serious, much longer way to listen to stories, you can check out my podcast, The Story Of by Reagan Snyder, anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks for being here. See ya.